The stack of papers sounds too loud when Evan drops it on the coffee table like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom instead of their cozy suburban living room. The late afternoon light slants in through the bay window, turning the dust in the air into thin, accusing beams. My parents sit side by side on the couch, their hands knotted together so tightly, their knuckles are white. Brooke is in the chair directly across from me, barefaced, for once her manicured fingers picking at a loose thread on her sweater. My heart thuds in my ears as Evan clears his throat, his voice rougher than I've ever heard it. $96,500, he says, each digit slow and deliberate. The room goes very still, the hum of the refrigerator in the adjoining kitchen suddenly deafening. He fans out the statements, the slick paper catching against one another with a dry whisper, like leaves scraping over pavement. This is the total of Brooke's personal debt, and over $52,000 of it came from Hannah's bank account. My dad's head snaps toward me so fast I can hear his neck crack. My mom blinks mascara already smudged at the corners from tears she cried before I even walked in. Brooke's eyes flash to me wide and furious and afraid all at the same time. The smell of the coffee someone made an hour ago hangs heavy in the warm room, going bitter as it cools like the air between all of us. "That's not how it is," Brooke says, her voice breaking on the last word. Her knee bounces hard enough that the charm bracelet on her ankle jingles a soft little chime that makes my skin prickle. "You're twisting it, Evan. You're making me look like a liar." Evan's voice stays steady, but the muscle in his jaw jumps. He picks up one of the statements and holds it out, the paper trembling just slightly in his hand. Because right here on this line, it shows the automatic transfers from Hannah's account every month. 5 years' worth. "That trust fund you said your grandmother set up?" He glances at my grandma, sitting stiff and small at the edge of the couch, the floral fabric of the cushion creasing under her thin frame. She never set up any trust fund. The old clock on the wall ticks steadily, each second landing like a tiny hammer blow. I can feel the imprint of the couch fabric under my palms, where I'm bracing myself, the woven texture digging into my skin. My mother turns toward me slowly, like she's finally seeing me for the first time, and doesn't quite recognize what she's looking at. "Hannah," she whispers, her voice papery. "Is this true?" My throat is dry, the taste of stale coffee and metal sitting on my tongue. I meet her eyes, and for once, I don't look away. "Every number on that table is true," I say. I hear my own voice, as if from the end of a hallway, calm, flat, almost gentle. Numbers don't lie. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt overlooked by the people who should have cared for you. My name is Hannah Reed, and for most of my life, I was the dependable one in a family that only had eyes for the showpiece. I'm 32 now, but the memories that matter still feel fresh, the way cold air feels when you open the freezer and it hits your face. I work as an internal auditor for a mid-sized company in Seattle, which sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, I know. My days are usually quiet, tapping on a keyboard in a chilled office, sipping lukewarm coffee, combing through spreadsheets in rooms that always smell faintly like printer toner and overbaked bagels. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment that I keep neat because numbers and order are how I make sense of a world that has never really made room for me. Growing up, our split-level house always felt a little off balance, like the floor tilted just slightly toward wherever my sister Brooke happened to be standing. If she had a soccer game, the whole house buzzed with excitement, my mom humming while she curled Brooke's hair, my dad shouting stats at the TV as he packed the car. If I had an honor roll certificate or a math trophy, it got taped to the fridge for a week and then disappeared into some drawer that smelled like old paper and rubber bands. Brooke got the big bedroom with the bay window and the soft, expensive comforter. I got the smaller room that still smelled faintly like fresh paint and sawdust. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was quieter than that. Little choices that added up over years, like change being dropped into a jar you never agreed to fill. My dad used to call me his calculator, ruffling my hair, as he walked past the scent of aftershave and motor oil clinging to his jacket. "Our little numbers girl," he'd say, while my mom cooed over Brooke's latest hairstyle or outfit. When Brooke needed a new costume for dance, Mom told me gently that my birthday money could help the family. When Brooke wanted extra spending cash for a school trip, I remember watching my dad pull money from an envelope in the kitchen drawer that I didn't know existed until then. I learned young that there were always resources for Brooke's emergencies and that my needs were flexible. By the time I was working full-time, my life ran on routine early alarms in the dark. The smell of coffee drifting through my quiet apartment, the soft click of my sensible heels on office tile. Brooke, on the other hand, seemed to float from one impressive-sounding consulting opportunity to the next, always posting pictures with bright filters and champagne glasses, always showing up to family events in clothes that looked like they cost more than my car. At gatherings, my mom's perfume, heavy and floral, always seemed to linger around Brooke like a fog, along with my dad's proud introductions. "This is our Brooke, she's in marketing and branding. Big client stuff." When he introduced me, it was with a fond but dismissive chuckle. "And this is Hannah, our number cruncher. Keeps the boring stuff running." People laughed like it was a joke we all agreed to. That Thanksgiving, the one that split everything in half, started like dozens of others. I showed up right on time, hands a little numb from the November air, carrying a homemade pumpkin pie in a glass dish that was still warm through the towel I wrapped around it. The house smelled like turkey and sage, and the lemon cleaner my mom always used before company came. Light from the crystal chandelier washed everything in a soft, almost golden glow. My teal dress felt too plain the moment I stepped inside, surrounded by sequins and holiday sweaters and the clink of glassware. My dad greeted me at the door, slapping my shoulder with that same old familiar phrase. "There she is, our number cruncher." The words were warm, but they landed like a weight on my chest, the way they always did. My mom took the pie with a quick kiss on my cheek, her lipstick leaving a faint waxy print on my skin. "Is that all you brought?" she asked, but her eyes were already darting past me toward the driveway, searching for a different set of headlights. The air was full of laughing voices and the faint jingle of silverware as relatives milled around. But underneath it, there was that same low hum of anticipation that always preceded Brooke's entrance. When she finally arrived 30 minutes late and glowing with that practiced, effortless charm, the whole room seemed to tilt toward the front door. Her coat, her bag, the soft sheen of her hair, it all caught the warm light as if it had been staged. My mother's face softened in a way it never did for me. She touched the sleeve of Brooke's coat like it was something fragile and precious. "You look stunning, sweetheart," she breathed while I stood a few feet away, my hands still smelling faintly of nutmeg and dish soap from washing up in the kitchen. Dinner should have been familiar. The clatter of plates, the smell of gravy and roasted vegetables, the steady murmur of overlapping conversations. I found myself wedged between a cousin and an uncle's new girlfriend, my chair just slightly closer to the wall, the draft from the window brushing my ankles. When my cousin leaned toward me, lowering her voice to ask about her student loans, something inside me relaxed a little. I talked about interest rates and repayment programs, the numbers lining up neatly in my mind while the candlelight flickered against the silverware. It felt good for a moment to be useful in the way I knew how. Then my mother cut across the table with that light, sharp tone she uses when she's about to rearrange a moment to suit her story. "Not everyone wants to listen to math at dinner, dear," she said, smiling too brightly. "Why don't you ask Brooke? She's great with money." The words hung over the table like steam, warm and suffocating. The scrape of forks on plates slowed. I could feel my face heating, my ears buzzing with the strain of swallowing everything I wanted to say. Brooke laughed, a tinkling little sound that fit perfectly with the clink of crystal glasses. She swirled her wine and tilted her head, the light catching the ring on her finger. "Oh, Hannah's always crunching numbers," she said, "and always short on cash, it seems." A few people chuckled politely, the kind of soft, uncomfortable laughter that tastes like dry turkey and shame. I set my fork down carefully, feeling the ridges of the handle press into my fingertips. "I manage my money just fine," I heard myself say, my voice steady, even though my chest felt tight. Brooke arched one perfect eyebrow. "Then why are you always asking for loans?" she said louder this time, her gaze sweeping the table. The room went quiet in an instant, the only sound, the faint hiss of something bubbling over in the kitchen. 20 pairs of eyes swung toward me, curious, skeptical, hungry for a story they'd never heard before. In that breathless moment, with the smell of cinnamon and gravy hanging heavy in the warm air, and my heart pounding against my ribs, I realized something terrible. No one at that table knew the truth about where the money really went. And the next words out of my sister's mouth were about to rewrite 5 years of sacrifice in a single brutal sentence. The cicadas buzzed so loudly that summer afternoon, it felt like the whole yard was vibrating with their restless song. I remember sitting on the back steps, my bare legs sticking to the warm wood, watching my mother tie the final satin ribbon into Brooke's hair. The sun caught the shimmer of her dance costume as she twirled a soft rustle of fabric, following her like applause. I held a wrinkled envelope in my hand, my name written crookedly on the front in my father's handwriting. Inside were the last few dollars of my birthday money. "Are you sure, honey?" my mother asked without looking at me, her voice drifting through the sticky air like a breeze she didn't notice. The question was gentle, but her hands were already fastening Brooke's shoes, fingertips brushing the sequins as though they mattered more than the moment. Brooke turned her face toward me for a second, her smile bright and expectant, the faint scent of her strawberry hairspray drifting on the heat between us. "I really need the new costume," she said, bouncing on her toes. "The other girls already have theirs." I held out the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, the paper soft from being handled too much. As my mother took it, her fingers grazed mine, cool, quick, dismissive. She tucked it into her purse without counting it. "Your sister needs it more," she said softly, brushing a stray hair from Brooke's forehead. "You understand?" The cicadas droned on. My father called from the car. Brooke ran to him, her costume catching the light like something magical. I sat still on the warm steps, my hands empty and my throat tight, the air humming around me as if it were swallowing whatever protest I might have had. The memory never fades, no matter how many years stack on top of it. That's the thing about childhood wounds, they don't disappear. They burrow quietly, waiting to be remembered. I learned early that in our family, gentleness was a one-way street. It flowed toward Brooke like warmth from a fireplace, while I sat at the edges in the draft. These weren't cruel acts in the dramatic sense. There were no slammed doors or raised voices. Instead, it was a long series of soft, small decisions that told me my place. Like pebbles dropped into a jar, barely noticeable one by one. But sooner or later, you realized the jar had filled almost to the top. Holiday mornings were always the clearest example. The house would smell like cinnamon rolls and pine wreaths, the kind of scent that wraps around a memory and never lets it go. My parents always handed Brooke her gifts first, the bright wrapping catching the morning sun through the living room windows. She tore them open with the delighted shrieks of a child who never doubted she was adored. I learned to open mine quietly, slowly, waiting until the room's attention drifted elsewhere so I wouldn't seem greedy. I can still remember one Christmas when I was around 10. My mother had picked out a pink sweater for me, soft, neatly folded, still carrying the faint plasticky scent from the store. I pulled it from the box and smiled, genuinely grateful. But right next to me, Brooke opened a new tablet, the screen lighting up her face with a glow that seemed brighter than the tree lights themselves. My father handed her the user manual, pointing out features with the same excitement he never held for my achievements. The sweater sat warmly in my lap. But in that moment, it felt like I'd been told without words that my needs should stay small. School events followed the same rhythm. If Brooke had a game, the entire family rearranged everything. Dinners, reheated chores, skipped schedules adjusted. When I had an academic awards ceremony, I remember my mother glancing at the clock, sighing softly, saying she hoped it wouldn't run too long, because Brooke had to get up early for practice. Even during the ceremony, I could feel her impatience beside me. Her perfume, something floral and cold, distinct against the antiseptic smell of the school auditorium. When my name was called, she clapped politely, her smile small. On the drive home, she asked Brooke about the next soccer match, as though the last hour had been a brief inconvenience. I know they didn't mean to hurt me. That's what makes it harder to untangle. If someone breaks you once sharply, you know where the injury came from. But if someone wears down your edges over years with soft, thoughtless hands, you start believing you weren't meant for sharpness in the first place. By the time I reached adulthood, I had become the person my family trained me to be: helpful, quiet, responsible. The one who solved things behind the scenes. I was the steady child, the steady teen, the steady adult. I kept my college stress to myself so my parents wouldn't worry. When they needed me to pick up Brooke from somewhere, I left my plans without question. When Brooke needed money just for a few days, I sent it automatically, my fingers barely pausing over the transfer button. The truth was, I didn't think I deserved to take up space. Not in conversation, not in conflict, not even in my own bank account. That's the part people never talk about, how you can become so accustomed to shrinking that you don't notice how small you've gotten. How you can grow into adulthood carrying the weight of being the good one, the practical one, the selfless one, and not realize that those labels can be traps disguised as praise. My silence wasn't a personality trait. It was a survival strategy. I carried those habits into every corner of my life. In meetings, I let louder voices win even when I knew they were wrong. With friends, I hesitated to share my struggles for fear of seeming needy. And with Brooke, I never questioned why I was the one who sent the money each month while she floated from one glamorous story to the next. It didn't matter that I worked long hours in a chilly office that hummed with fluorescent lights, or that I lived in a modest apartment where I could hear the soft clink of pipes through the walls when my neighbor showered late at night. I kept my spending small, kept my wants quiet. I convinced myself that Brooke had more needs, more social obligations, more pressure to maintain whatever image she'd constructed. Every time I thought about pulling back, I heard echoes of my childhood. My mother's gentle insistence that Brooke needed the new costume. My father's casual pride when she entered a room. All those years of reinforced patterns planted inside me like roots. So when Brooke asked for help, or when she hinted at help, or when she simply let her bills drift into crisis and expected me to catch them, I did. Automatically. Almost instinctively. It wasn't generosity. It was conditioning. Looking back now, I can see how the pieces fit together, how the silence I carried from childhood had hardened into something like obedience. I had been trained to protect Brooke's world, even if it meant dismantling my own brick by brick. The ache of that realization didn't settle overnight. It came slowly like shadows lengthening across a room as afternoon turns to dusk. I felt it in the heaviness that settled behind my ribs every time I saw Brooke arrive at family gatherings in clothes I knew were purchased with debt I quietly maintained. I felt it in the way my mother beamed at her, unable or unwilling to see the imbalance. I felt it in my father's familiar chuckle when he introduced me as the reliable one, as though reliability was the sum total of my worth. Sometimes at night, when my apartment was still, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I would sit at my little desk with the overhead light dimmed low. My hands would hover over my checkbook or my budgeting app, feeling the same uneasy tightness in my chest that I used to feel sitting on those warm wooden steps as a child. The air would feel thick, like something unspoken was swirling right in front of me, waiting for me to finally acknowledge it. I had given up so many small pieces of myself over the years, not because Brooke demanded them loudly, but because she never had to. I offered them before she could even ask. And the saddest part, she never seemed to notice. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around this year, the weight of all those years had settled so deeply into the fabric of my life that I barely noticed it. Like a coat you've worn for so long, you forget it's heavy until the day someone helps you take it off and you realize how freely you can breathe. Still, something inside me knew change was coming. A faint tremor under the surface. A whisper that the years of quiet sacrifice were about to collide with a truth too large to keep hidden any longer. I just didn't realize how soon that moment would arrive, or how loudly the truth would echo once it finally broke free. The phone buzzed against the porcelain edge of the sink, its vibration sharp enough to echo in the small powder room. I dried my trembling hands on one of my mother's decorative towels, the kind no one was ever meant to actually use, and glanced at the screen. 5 alerts glowed in a tight column. Payment failed. Payment failed. Autopay declined. My breath hitched. Another buzz. Urgent, call me now. Then another. The soft, floral-scented air felt suddenly too thin, as though the wallpaper itself was pressing in on me. I opened my banking app with numb fingers. The glow of the screen lit the room in a cold blue, the numbers coming into focus like a camera lens sharpening. 5 separate recurring transfers, 5 different destinations, the same name on each. My pulse hammered as I scrolled. Dates, amounts, years, row after row after row. A quiet gasp escaped me loud in the otherwise still room. My thumb hovered, then tapped. Cancel payment. The button pulsed back at me, waiting. I pressed it. Again and again. Each confirmation chimed softly in the silent room like tiny bells marking the end of a season I hadn't realized I'd been living in. The last payment vanished from the list, leaving a blank space where obligation had lived for half a decade. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling the cool porcelain counter steadying me beneath my hand. The shock of it settled slowly like dust drifting through a shaft of afternoon light, visible, undeniable, impossible to ignore. I stepped out of that powder room feeling like someone who had just walked through a door that wasn't supposed to be opened. The hallway light was soft and warm, but everything inside me felt cold, hollow, rearranged. When I sat back down at the table, I could still feel the vibration of those failed payment alerts in my fingertips. Later that night, back in my small apartment, I opened my laptop. The screen's glow washed across my living room in muted shades of white and gray, casting long shadows across the coffee table. I typed Brooke Reed payment record at the top of a blank spreadsheet. The soft clatter of the keys sounded too loud in the quiet room, the familiar rhythm steadier than my breath. As the pages of my banking history loaded, the truth unfolded with a clarity that twisted my stomach. I clicked through month after month, the numbers lining up with painful precision. 3 credit cards, a personal loan, car insurance on a luxury vehicle she didn't need, fees, interest, late charges. Each entry pulled another thread loose. I realized slowly and with growing dread that every time Brooke had breezily told me she needed just a little help, she'd already built my contribution into her budget because she expected it, because she assumed it, because she believed it was my responsibility to make her life function when her own choices wouldn't. And there it was, 5 years of evidence laid bare before me. 5 years of my paycheck siphoned away to support a lifestyle that had never belonged to me. 5 years of adjusting my own life to accommodate hers. Seeing it all in one place felt like having the wind knocked out of me. The smell of cooling coffee drifted from the kitchen. A faint hum from the refrigerator filled the quiet. Outside, someone's car door shut with a soft thud. Ordinary noises that only made the revelation feel more surreal. I sat back in my chair, fingers pressed to my temples. My mind sifted through years of moments that now took on new meaning. The designer dresses, the weekend getaways, the champagne toasts at family events. My mother's admiring comments, my father's indulgent chuckles. They'd all believed Brooke had built that world. They'd all celebrated her for it. But they were celebrating my sacrifice. I remembered the nights I'd stared at my checking account calculating whether I could replace my aging tires, or if that would strain the month too much. The weekends I'd declined invitations because I needed to save. The vacations I'd said no to because I couldn't afford it. I hadn't been budgeting for myself. I'd been budgeting for her. My heart thudded hard in my chest as the realization settled deeper. I hadn't just been funding Brooke's image. I'd been protecting the lie that she was stable, responsible, successful. I'd been her hidden safety net, and she had looked me in the eye at Thanksgiving and told a table full of relatives that I begged her for money. My jaw clenched. A heat rose beneath my skin, a mix of shame, anger, and something sharper, something almost like clarity. I leaned forward, studying the numbers line by line. The evidence was undeniable, each entry a steady march of betrayal conducted in plain sight, yet somehow invisible to me until now. Maybe I hadn't wanted to see it. Maybe part of me believed helping her was the only place I had value in this family. Maybe I thought silence made me good. But silence was just the lock she used to keep me in place. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the spreadsheet, patient and expectant. I began adding totals, monthly sums, yearly sums. The number grew quickly, a harsh reminder of the scale of what I had allowed myself to endure. By the time the final total appeared, the breath caught in my throat. $52, $800. The room seemed to tilt, the weight of the number settling deep inside me. The radiator clicked softly behind me, releasing a faint warmth into the air, but I felt cold to my core. I thought of Brooke's accusation at the dinner table, the lifted eyebrow, the laugh, the way everyone had turned to look at me with mild curiosity, not one of them questioning the story she'd spun. I thought of my mother's voice earlier that night, sweet, oblivious, eager to defend Brooke without ever asking me for my truth. I thought of my father's proud, booming introduction of Brooke and the tired, dismissive chuckle he always reserved for me. Suddenly, all of it lined up like the columns in front of me. This wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the natural outcome of a pattern that had been quietly shaping itself around me since childhood. A pattern I had learned to cooperate with. A pattern I had mistaken for love. My phone buzzed again on the table, Brooke's name flashing across the screen, followed by another message. Fix it. Then another. Now. The screen dimmed, then lit again. Why are you doing this to me? The absurdity of the question almost made me laugh. I turned the phone face down. The apartment seemed too quiet all of a sudden, as though it were holding its breath. The soft glow of the lamp cast a warm pool of light over the open laptop, catching on the faint scratches in the wood of the coffee table. This room held so many evenings of me worrying over my finances, of me choosing restraint, of me holding myself together so her world didn't fall apart. Not anymore. My breathing steadied as a new understanding settled into place, a decision forming not out of impulse, but out of necessity. I felt the shift inside me like a slow turning of gears. I wasn't going to be Brooke's silent benefactor anymore. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative with lies that made me small. I wasn't going to let her stand in rooms and call me needy while spending the money I worked for. The truth was sitting in front of me in neat, undeniable rows. I closed the laptop, gently listening to the faint click of the hinge. It sounded like closure. It sounded like resolve. And as I reached over to turn off the lamp, plunging the room into soft darkness, one clear thought anchored itself in my mind with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. It's time to expose the truth, and I won't be doing it quietly. The folder snaps open with a sharp crack that slices through the quiet living room. Papers spill across the coffee table like a deck of cards thrown by an impatient dealer, glossy pages flashing under the soft lamplight. Conversations stop mid-sentence. My father's hand freezes around his glass, suspended just inches from his mouth. My mother's breath catches audible in the hush. Brooke stiffens across from me, her fingers still curled around the stem of her wine glass, knuckles whitening as if she's trying to hold onto something slipping through her grasp. I lift one sheet from the pile, an itemized credit card statement, and place it in the center of the table. The sound is small, but it lands with the weight of a stone dropped into still water. Everyone leans forward. The air feels charged, humming faintly like static before a storm. Brooke's chair scrapes against the hardwood as she stands abruptly. "What are you doing, Hannah?" she demands, her voice thin and sharp. I meet her eyes across the room. Then I say it steady and clear. I'm showing them the truth. The moment stretches so tightly it might snap, but let me take you back to how we reached this exact breath, this split second, where everything finally cracked open. I didn't walk into that gathering to create a scene. I didn't rehearse some dramatic speech in the mirror. I simply recognized after years of silence and weeks of unraveling that truth only survives when you drag it into the light. And there's something about a family assembled in one room, faces stripped bare under warm lamps, that makes dishonesty harder to hide. Evan had called earlier that day, his voice carrying a strain I'd never heard from him before, a tremor beneath the words. "Come," he'd said. "Tonight. It's time." The exhaustion in his tone told me he had reached his limit. And for the first time, he wasn't protecting Brooke's facade either. So I printed everything, 5 years of transfers, bank summary screenshots. The printer's warm, dusty smell hung in the air as I gathered the pages, the stack still faintly warm at the edges. I slid them into a plain folder, the kind you'd mistake for unimportant until you felt its weight. And I drove across town with that folder on the passenger seat, as though it were a passenger itself. When I stepped into their living room that evening, everyone was already there. My parents on the couch, their faces tense and uncertain. Grandma perched tightly on the love seat, her hands folded like she was bracing for unwelcome news. Brooke pacing near the fireplace, her hair pulled back too neatly, her smile too brittle. And now we're back in the moment. The room is so quiet, I can hear the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The heat from the fireplace warms the air, but does nothing to thaw the sharp tension between us. These, I say, my hand moving slowly over the spread of statements, are the payments I made. Every month. For 5 years. My father's brow knits as he leans in, adjusting his glasses with a small, trembling motion. He picks up a sheet, the paper rustling in his hand. My mother watches him, her breathing shallow, a faint floral scent from her perfume drifting across the coffee table. Brooke laughs, a brittle sound, hollow and breaking at the edges. "Anyone can fake documents," she says, voice rising. "She's doing this because she's jealous." She's always been jealous, Brooke Evans says, quietly. She whirls toward him. Don't Brooke me. She's twisting everything. You know how she gets. But Evan doesn't back down. He doesn't even blink. Instead, he reaches into the drawer of the TV stand and pulls out another envelope. Thicker, sealed. He lays it on the table beside my documents, and the room goes still as glass. What is that? My mother asks, barely above a whisper. The rest of it, he says softly. The envelope opens with a slow tear, the sound harsh in the silence. Inside are printouts, emails, statements, digital receipts, neater and more organized than anything I expected. He spreads them out beside mine, the pages catching the lamplight with a muted sheen. This isn't just about the money Hannah paid, Evan says, his voice steady but strained. It's what Brooke did with it. Brooke's face drains of color. Don't she breathes? Evan, don't you dare! But he continues. She told me, he says, each word deliberate, that the money she used for the renovations, our kitchen remodel, the down payment on the SUV, the deposit for the vacation, she told me it came from a family gift. From your parents. She said it was an inheritance given early. My father looks up sharply. That's not true. We never... I know, Evan says. He lays down a final piece of paper, a bank transfer authorization. My breath stops as I recognize the handwriting on the signature line. My handwriting, and beneath it the day-to-day. I can't even recall, but the signature is unmistakable. Brooke steps forward quickly, her voice cracking. I can explain. That wasn't... She said I could use her name. She said it was fine. No, I say quietly, the word cutting through her lie like a blade. I never said that. I never saw that form. The room reels for a moment, everyone frozen as the truth takes shape. Brooke hadn't just used my money. She'd forged my consent. She'd signed my name for transfers that exceeded what I willingly gave her. Transfers I never saw, because she rerouted the alerts to an email she created using my initials. It clicks into place so cleanly that I feel almost sick. A soft gasp escapes my mother, her hand flying to her mouth. My father lowers the papers in his hand, his eyes dark with something like grief. Grandma closes her eyes, a subtle shake of her head, betraying the depth of her disappointment. Brooke's composure fractures. I did it for us, she whispers, turning to Evan. For our life. For how things are supposed to look. But they weren't real, he says, his voice breaking in a way I've never heard. None of it was real. And you used your sister to keep the illusion alive. The fire pops, sending a spray of sparks upward. The sound makes Brooke flinch. I thought, she says, her breath shallow. I really thought she'd help. She always does. She always cleans up the mess. I stand slowly. The carpet beneath my feet feels soft, almost too soft for a moment like this. My heart is steady, my voice clear. Not anymore. Everyone looks at me. The weight of their eyes doesn't shrink me the way it used to. The air in the room has shifted, no longer heavy with expectation, but charged with something closer to reckoning. I'm done, I say. I'm done being the one who fixes everything. I'm done being used. And I'm done being quiet. Brooke looks at me, her expression cracking fear, anger, disbelief flashing across her features like shadows. But she says nothing. Not one word. For the first time in my life, the room is on my side. My father sets the papers down with a long exhale, his voice low and hoarse when he speaks. Hannah, he says, I'm so sorry. My mother nods, tears slipping silently down her cheek. Evan closes the folder slowly, as though sealing the moment shut. "This ends tonight," he says, his voice firm. I gather the documents, sliding them neatly back into my folder. The manila edges feel warm against my palms. The room stays silent as I walk toward the door, footsteps muffled against the carpet. At the threshold, I pause. The fire crackles behind me. Someone sniffles. The air is thick with shock, but beneath it, something else. A shift, a realignment. I leave them in that silence, the truth settling around them like a fine layer of ash after a long burning fire. And I walk into the cool night air, the door closing softly behind me, ready for whatever comes next. When the door closed behind me that night, the sound was softer than I expected, just a muted click carried on the cool air. Yet it felt like the echo of something much larger finishing its long collapse. The porch light cast a faint halo over the driveway, catching on the thin mist rising from the pavement after a drizzle. I paused at the bottom step, letting the quiet settle around me. My breath came slowly steady in a way it hadn't felt in years. Even the night itself seemed different, wider somehow, as if the world had taken one step back to give me room. I walked to my car without looking back. The cool metal of the door handle steadied me, and when I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of pine air freshener wrapped around me like an old friend. I sat there for a long moment, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, feeling the shift inside my chest, subtle but unmistakable. Something had broken open, and something else had finally come alive. In the days that followed, that sensation stayed with me like a pulse beneath the surface. It was what guided me from the aftermath of the confrontation into the slow, deliberate work of reclaiming my own life. I started with my apartment. One quiet Saturday morning, I moved the worn-out furniture to the hallway pieces I had kept far longer than I wanted to because I'd always been afraid to spend money on myself. The air in the apartment was cool, carrying the faint scent of sawdust from the new bookshelf I'd assembled the night before. My hands were still marked faintly by the pressure of the screwdriver. I opened the windows and let the fresh autumn air sweep through, stirring the curtains and clearing out years of unspoken tension. Then I chose a new paint color for the small wall behind my desk, a deep, grounded green that reminded me of moss-covered trees after a rain. As the brush glided over the wall, the strokes slow and deliberate, a strange sense of peace unfurled inside me. The sound of bristles against plaster, the faint chemical scent of the paint, the shifting morning light, they all blended into something that felt like healing in motion. For the first time, the space began to feel like mine, not a holding place, not a temporary shelter, but a home growing into itself. My relationship with my family found a quieter place too. I didn't cut anyone off with a dramatic announcement. I didn't slam any doors. I simply let distance settle gently between us, like a curtain drawn partway closed. I answered calls selectively. I paused before responding to texts. When my mother asked tentatively now if I might come for dinner, I told her I wasn't ready yet, saying the words with a calm certainty I didn't know I possessed. There was no anger in it, no bitterness, just a boundary placed exactly where it needed to be. Brooke reached out only once in those early weeks, a short, shaky message late one night. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm trying to get my life together. I hope someday we can talk." I stared at the screen for a long time, listening to the hum of my heater and the distant sound of a neighbor's TV through the thin apartment walls. I typed a simple response. take care of yourself. And that was enough for both of us. What surprised me most in those months was how other people stepped quietly into the spaces that had once felt so empty. My coworker Dylan stopped by my desk one afternoon with a steaming cup of chamomile tea, placing it down without a word, but with a warm, knowing smile. My manager praised my focus, her tone soft, with genuine appreciation. Even my neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Turner, a retired librarian with a gentle voice, knocked on my door one evening with a plate of lemon bars and said she'd noticed I'd been lifting heavy things alone and wanted to make sure I had someone to talk to. None of these gestures were grand, none of them dramatic. But each one landed softly like a hand resting on a weary shoulder. And little by little, I realized I was no longer waiting for validation from people who had never offered it freely. I had found connection steadier, warmer, and far more real elsewhere. As winter settled in, I began redirecting the money that once vanished into Brooke's debts. It felt strange at first, almost indulgent, to watch my savings grow. Some nights, I would sit at my new oak desk, the glow of my lamp warming the freshly painted wall, and review my budget not with dread, but with a quiet excitement. I started a small future fund, not for anything specific, just a symbol of possibility, a symbol of permission. One cold evening, I bought myself a thick wool coat, the kind I'd admired on others but never thought I should spend money on. The fabric felt heavy and warm on my shoulders as I walked home. Snowflakes began falling, large gentle ones that melted as soon as they touched the ground. I lifted my face toward the sky, feeling the cool tickle of snow on my cheeks, and let out a breath that fogged in the air. It was such a simple moment, but it marked something deeper. I was choosing myself, fully, finally. Spring came with its own quiet rebirth. One Saturday morning, with the windows open and birdsong echoing from the courtyard, I potted a small rosemary plant on my kitchen windowsill. The soil was cool and damp in my hands, the scent earthy and clean. As I pressed the roots gently into place and watered them, I realized I hadn't done something this nurturing for myself in a very long time. And that plant, small, hardy, unassuming, became a symbol of everything my life was becoming. Something growing steadily, not for show, not for approval, but for its own simple worth. By early summer, my parents reached out again. Their voices sounded different, quieter, humbled in ways that surprised me. My father asked if we could meet for coffee. My mother wrote a letter instead of calling, her handwriting softer than I remembered. I didn't say yes right away. I let myself choose the timing, and when I did meet them weeks later, it was in a sunlit cafe near my apartment. The warm smell of brewed coffee wrapped around us as we talked, slowly, cautiously, honestly. We didn't fix everything in one afternoon. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. But for the first time, I didn't shrink to fit the space between us. I simply sat there, grounded and whole. And they met me there. One year after everything broke open, I hosted a small dinner in my apartment. Just a few friends and neighbors. The air filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and fresh rosemary from the plant that had grown sturdy on my windowsill. The laughter was soft, the lighting warm, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of belonging that didn't rely on anyone's approval, only on truth and presence. Looking back now, I see that I didn't just reclaim my finances. I reclaimed my voice, my boundaries, my sense of home, both the physical space around me and the quiet place inside myself. And the truth is simple. Sometimes healing isn't a dramatic transformation. Sometimes it's a series of small, steady choices, each one saying, I deserve a life that doesn't hurt to live in. In the end, what I learned is this peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly like morning light through an open window, touching everything you once feared to look at. And when it finally settles in, you realize you're standing in a life that feels like your own at last.